So, we've been talking a lot about how really important it is to raise reading and writing levels, not only in English classes, but in content area classes as well. So, traditional concepts of literacy have typically not included content knowledge and have been really narrowly defined as just the ability to read and write. But I think it's really important to incorporate reading and writing um, into content area classes because it can't just be the job of English classes to raise reading and writing skills. Social studies requires the study of many different types of primary and secondary sources. Many of these sources are written and sometimes, actually, a lot of the time, require advanced reading skills. Journals, newspapers, articles, advertisements, books, letters, and written stories are all examples of sources that we may use in a social studies class. And our students need to not only know how to read them, but they'll also need to know how to analyze what they're reading. It is really difficult, in my opinion, to enjoy history and other social studies classes with limited literacy skills. Therefore, if we want our students to enjoy social studies, which that's definitely a goal of mine as a teacher, and if we want them to join our knowledge community, as they call it in Content Matters, it is our job to encourage disciplinary literacy as much as possible. As an aspiring social studies teacher, I think teachers should encourage our students to approach the study of history as historians. In history, students can't simply read the text on a page and understand fully what's happening. You must read and analyze the subtext and the context in which the source was written, um, and read multiple interpretations, organize the fragments, and try to discover what was really happening at that time. And by doing this, the history will stick with them far longer than if we just simply assigned a chapter and quizzed them on it later. This type of reading and close analysis in history classes causes students to take more responsibility for their learning, um, gather evidence, and summarize that evidence to create their own arguments. When you encourage this type of reading and writing, you're not simply improving literacy, you're also improving content retention, which is one of the major goals as a social studies teacher. Um, Also, in social studies classrooms, reading is too often approached as a before and after process. You don't know the content before, and you understand it after you read it. This is a way oversimplified way of learning, and it doesn't take into account students' prior knowledge. It assumes that students know every word in the reading, and that once students have finished the reading, they have all the knowledge. Teachers, as well as students, need to approach reading with a before, during, and after model. This teaches students to approach reading with a plan, and it helps monitor their own learning. Sometimes, something like a KWL chart would be um, a good assessment for students to monitor their learning. Graphic organizers like KWLs are just a really easy and effective way of improving reading and retention in content areas, and they give students a plan for reading and the time to reflect on what they learned throughout the reading. So this is an example of a KWL chart. If I were doing a lesson on Henry VIII, for example, before handing out a reading, I would put the KWL chart on the board and start with questions like, what do you guys know about Henry VIII? I would expect some students to say, oh, he had a lot of wives. Some of his wives, got killed. And this is when the teacher starts pushing for more prior knowledge. Well, do any of you know why he had some of his wives put to death? Just accept as many responses as you can, unless they're just completely off topic, and gather as much of the prior knowledge that they have before moving on to the what do you want to know. When you engage students' prior knowledge and ask them what they want to learn from the reading, it helps the teacher gauge just how much they needs to be covered, and it gives the students an idea of what to expect while reading. And then the L column allows time to reflect on what they learned, which I think is really important. We aren't giving students enough time to reflect on what they're taking in. And I just think that not giving them time to reflect doesn't allow for the content to stick. As I mentioned before, simply reading a text without doing a before, during, after process doesn't allow students time to study new vocabulary. Students bring a wide range of word understandings to learning of new topics and content areas, and it's therefore really important to assess students' vocabulary awareness. And that's when something like a vocabulary self-awareness chart becomes really handy. This is what the vocab self-awareness chart looks like. So with this chart, you provide students with a list of important words before you start a reading, and ask the students to rate each vocabulary word according to their level of familiarity or understanding. They put a plus sign, which indicates a high degree of comfort or knowledge. They use a check mark, which indicates uncertainty, and a question mark indicates that the word is brand new to them. Then you ask students to try and supply a definition and an example for each word, and reassure students that for words with a check mark or minus signs, or question mark signs, students may have to make educated guesses. And over the course of the reading or unit allows time for students to revisit their self-awareness chart, to add new information and update their growing knowledge about key vocabulary. And the goal is to bring all students to a comfort level with the unit's important content terminology. And they can revisit this in future vocabulary, in future readings, and just start growing their vocabulary. We talked about how there's an incredible gap in vocab acquisition once students reach secondary school. And cognitive organizers like this really help students to grow in their vocab arsenal. Another cognitive organizer that I think is very relevant in social studies is the question-answer relationship chart. And this chart requires teachers to model the different levels of questions that are associated with a text. And the strategy categorizes different types and levels of questions. It also helps students to analyze, comprehend, and respond to text concepts. And in my opinion, one of the things that I like about it is it refutes the misconception held by students that the text has all the answers. Some of the answers you'll be able to find in the text, but some of them you have to find on your own. So this is a little question-answer relationship chart that I made about the reading The Jungle. So the way it works is there are right there questions. These are questions that you're easily going to find in a text. What is the book about? Who is the author? When was it written? Then there's the find and search. What was the setting of the jungle? What was the time period? Who are the characters? What did the characters do? What are some predictions you might have about the reading? Then there's the author and me section, which you're going to do after you're done reading. What was the impact on the jungle on exposing corruptions? You're not just going to find an easy answer for this in the text. You're really going to have to think about what you've been learning in the class, knowledge you acquired from the reading, to really figure out what the impact was of this book on the population of the United States and our food sanitation laws. Then there's the on my own section. What would your reaction have been to reading The Jungle if you had lived during the Progressive era, and what steps for change would you have taken? They're not going to find this answer in the book. They really have to think about this on their own. So I think this is a very useful cognitive organizer for social studies especially, but I'm sure it would be incredibly useful in all content areas. Apart from approaching reading with a before, during, and after plan, teachers also need to structure lessons to meet the needs of the different reading levels in the classroom. So for example, if I were teaching, I'm going to keep going off of my Progressive era jungle muckraking theme. If I were teaching a lesson on muckraking during the Progressive era, I could go around and assign 3 different readings to 3 different reading level students. I would give the above reading level readers excerpts from the Food Safety Act, which is kind of a more complex, difficult assignment. Then I could give at reading level students excerpts from The Jungle, which is a medium level reading assignment. And then I could give below reading level students a letter or diary of a worker who worked in a meatpacking plant. Then I would use the jigsaw approach by having students with the same reading assemble and read it together. After they're done reading, they could go through and decide the important aspects of the reading and what they should teach to the students who had been assigned different readings. Then they'll assemble into mixed groups and teach each other about the readings that they all had, and all of them had a common theme. And I think this is a discreet way of meeting the needs of different reading levels in a classroom without making it obvious who's above, who's below. Note-taking, I also think, is a very important skill for students to use to improve their understanding and retention of material as they read and are taught in class. It is a useful way of working through a difficult text, yet it is one of the most erratic and unmonitored student activities in the classroom. I think it's important to expose students to different note-taking frameworks and formats and show students model good note-taking techniques for students. Simple note-taking handouts like this one, bulleted main ideas, the details of the main ideas, and then after reading, reflect and summarize what you took notes on during the reading and summarize it at the end. Teaching effective note-taking will be a lifelong skill, but I think it's important for students to get into the habit of taking well-organized, detailed notes in middle school and high school. It can't be left just until college. So to kind of wrap things up, reading and language teachers are not the only ones that should assist students to read and write, because every teacher is responsible for teaching literacy in his or her content area. It is important to understand that content advances through literacy and understanding, and literacy advances through content understanding. Although it would be easier for us teachers to simply assign a chapter to read and then test students on it later, the strategies that I discussed earlier will result in students who take much more responsibility in their learning and have critical thinking and reading skills that will help them through the remainder of their educational career. Thank you very much.